Hi, and welcome back to SOS Stories of Survivors. I'm your host, Serina Dansker, and today I feel so blessed to have a wonderful, wonderful man that I've known for a long time, Mr. Erik Moses. Today's conversation is all about courage, truth, and reclaiming your voice. Erik is a survivor of sexual abuse that occurred when he was just 15 years old. It was at a time when he was vulnerable, bullied, and like most of us, you go through a lot and you're looking for safety, someone to confide in. And the people that were meant to protect him let him down. And like many survivors, Erik carried this throughout his life quietly, and it showed up in different ways, unbeknownst to him. And today, though, he's healing and he's going to share his story. So thank you for your bravery. Thank you for your voice. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Serena. I'm really happy to be here.
Let's talk about before everything changed. Who were you? Who were you at 15 years old? What were you like as a kid?
Well, as a young kid, I think I was fairly typical, but I always felt a little different. My mom, would tell you that as a young child, I was happy and curious and all the good things you'd want in a, toddler going into kindergarten.
Yeah.
But things changed for me quickly as soon as I was out of the house. Once I was in school, I had a lazy eye, wore an eye patch in elementary school.
Pirate.
That's what I would have thought, but not so much in
Yeah.
northern New Jersey, where Van Halen and Led Zeppelin were kind of king, and
Right.
being different was not really celebrated.
Ah.
So I was small, I was young for my grade, and wore an eye patch. So that was kind of my intro to my education years.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had three younger brothers, and as as time went by, they were, my youngest brother and closest in age to me was a protector, and we're all still very close. But they're young, older. They're bigger kids. They're more athletic kids. They were more popular kids. I never really fit in socially. I used to dress as a cowboy to school.
Yeah.
In middle school, I loved Merle Haggard and country music, and I wrote my own music and would play it at will. And again, I thought it was cool, but not always celebrated in northern New Jersey, 10 miles from New York City.
Did you think that your music was like a safe space when you were looking for friends?
Not necessarily a safe space looking for friends, although like my one friend in the neighborhood and I did have a band where we would make musical noises with our mouths because we didn't play guitars yet. And so it was a lot of, but we had write our own lyrics. And
Well, that's
I
what
think
we
he
did
still
back
has all
then.
these audio tapes of us singing in his garage when we were kids. But once I got a guitar, I quickly started, playing both the songs of musicians I liked, mostly Merle Haggard, and then, but I started writing my own songs. And then I did have some early success playing at a music festival opening for Bobby Bear, who was popular at the time.
Wow.
But really, I spent a lot of that middle school time hiding from bullies, sneaking home through the woods and really feeling like I just don't fit in this world. And as time went by, it was more and more of a feeling of like a shame of my own self. And
did you have any safe spaces back then? Like, did you have escapes, like maybe the music? Or for me, when I was younger, and I was an only child, but I would escape into books and reading and get lost for hours there.
I did like to read. I think, growing up, when we grow up, ADHD and things like that were not diagnosed the same way they are today. In middle school, I was placed in gifted and talented, which was special ed for smart kids. Right? With ADHD, didn't live up to their abilities and had other distractions. So between the social distraction of not fitting in, the academic not fitting in and performing to the level I tested to, again, left me with a feeling of being othered, even though I did like the gifted and talented program because it let me pursue some of the artier things I was interested in, like sculpture, and I had the ability to express myself in ways I might not otherwise have had.
I think that's so important. I think having that ability to just an outlet so that you can, you carry all these emotions. And obviously at the time, our parents, they weren't like they are now. If you were being bullied at school, they were like, oh, go out in the back of the school.
But it's an interesting point you bring up because, part of my, guilt and shame as a young person was that I have a wonderful family. And, my mom was a teacher, my dad's a social worker. I felt a tremendous amount of guilt and, for not being happier, because as time went by, I did begin to feel what I now understand to be depression. And And I felt more guilt and shame for letting them down, even though they never put that on me. I always put that on myself and carried it with me very quietly, because I didn't want to hurt their feelings.
So for you, I know you were bullied and things like that, but did you have a safe space?
I work was my safe space. I had a paper route.
Okay, all right, I remember those.
Yep, I had two paper routes. One was the Free Weekly, and then I graduated to the Bergen Record, which was our daily paper. And what was really nice about that, it was, an independent pursuit. I had to go door to door and collect money from people. So I think it really was a good training for me. I work in sales today.
Definitely,
so I think it was definitely developed an acumen for interpersonal communication. And I did have a knack for connecting with older people in that way. So I think there was a comfort that came from that.
That's the
fact that my customers liked me, the kids didn't.
So quiet. Until you just said that, it never dawned on me that our kids today don't have, nobody gets the newspaper anymore, right? Nope. So they don't have that interaction. That's crazy.
And then the nice thing about that job too is that the Sunday paper, if you recall how big that
you had to put it together, right?
I had to put it together, but then my dad would, we had a Chevy Suburban, we'd load up the back, and he'd drive me around because I could never take them on my bike, and then we'd go get hot cocoa together, which was a really nice memory with my dad, and I really treasure those memories. And that early entrepreneurialism, led to me into working in a kitchen that I could walk to at a restaurant in the neighborhood. So I started scrubbing pots at 13 to save for a guitar and an amp, because I wanted to graduate to an electric guitar.
That's so awesome.
And that all worked out well in timing, because that was when I was headed toward high school.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's when I discovered punk rock. And, that kind of, I was feeling a building depression and, bleeding into a little bit of anger and rebellion. That punk rock really fed my soul in that way. And, the music, I didn't have to be as practiced and as perfect. And it was a kind of a nice collusion.
That's
at the time.
So cool. So yeah, it's funny you talk about the timing going from junior high into high school. I recall those days for myself, and I remember hanging out at the roller skating rinks, and people would be smoking pot or drinking. Did you ever turn to any of?
I went the other way, because one of my favorite bands early on in the early 80s was called Minor Threat, and I had Minor Threat tattoo on my arm, but and they were a straight edge band, so meaning no drinking, no cigarettes, no sex. Everything was very clean.
How cool.
And I also didn't want to be like my abusers. So, I chose work. I stayed in the restaurant, that restaurant actually through college. And so I graduated from the kitchen eventually to the front of the house and worked as a waiter and busboy and then waiter. So my weekends were spent at work. I was able to kind of hide from the social stuff. And I was not invited to parties. I wasn't invited to the roller rink. I didn't want to smoke pot and drink with those kids that had picked on me so brutally in middle school. And that did continue into high school. But I did in high school find a couple of new friends to play music with. And that was, I went to work and I played music. And those were my safe places. Mm. And actually, those same friends I played music with came to work at the restaurant. So it all became like a little support group.
That's
high school.
So important. Support. I mean, as I go through life, I never realized how much your support group matters.
Yep.
But it's everything. It really is.
Yeah. And I did come to, growing up with four boys, my poor mother, right? But growing up with four boys, my brothers were always around, and sure, we fought like brothers do and those types of things, but my brothers are some of my closest allies and friends today. And I'm so grateful that, I hear of other people who aren't close to their siblings, and I'm just so grateful that I do have that in my life and them in my life.
That's amazing. And I think that's something to really feel blessed, because not everybody has what you have.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Without going into details that feel unsafe, can you share what it was like to realize that the people that were meant to protect you and guide you cross boundaries?
Sure. I mean, my experience that we're talking about today occurred at the very beginning of my junior year. I was 15 because I was young for my grade. And I turned 16 later in my junior year in October. But I'd met a girl, and for the for the first time, like went on a real date. I remember my mom driving us to the theater so we could see Spinal Tap, and having my first like real memorable kiss with a girl, and like my first experience. Really, I was very late to bloom in that way, and was not socially active. I was busy with work and making music.
Right,
and,
right.
That romance was short-lived. She actually wound up taking up with the keyboard player in our band.
Of course you did.
Yeah, well, I was only playing rhythm guitar at that time. So, but she invited me to go on a church retreat with her, and they lived in the neighboring town, so it was not the parish I grew up in, and I would have followed her anywhere, sure.
Of
So,
course.
not that I hold her in any way,
No,
complicit,
no.
but she was active in her youth group and was encouraging her friends to come, So, of course, I was happy to go. And my mother was reluctant to send me, and she asked my next younger brother to go as well. But because we're in different grades, we weren't together at the retreat.
Okay.
But,
So it was a retreat. Okay.
Yeah, it was a
At least
weekend
with
retreat.
The church. Okay.
Yep. So it was the priest kicked it off. There was a youth minister, a music director, there was staff. It was
Okay.
a well supported.
And it was co-ed, the retreat.
Yeah,
obviously.
a couple dozen kids co-ed. It was a retreat center. But I got there on Saturday morning because we were away on a family trip the night before, and went home Sunday. But on both of those days, the youth minister, invited me to sit with him and talk about the upset it was of not finding, the relationship I was looking for with this young woman.
Right.
And in those two sessions, one-on-one in this private chamber room, I was treated inappropriately and against my will. But, for a young person who just had like their first real, meaningful kiss with a woman, like this was more than I'd ever experienced. And I didn't really know what happened.
How do you
what to
process?
do
You
with it.
don't, and you're young.
No,
How
no,
are you going
and-
to process this?
And, I'd already, we grew up in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there were words we don't use any longer that were used at school on me every day.
Right, right.
To go to the police to report sexual abuse
you didn't.
that I was party to, like that was not going to happen.
No, because what went on is to stayed at home or whatever went on. You didn't do that because it brought the people.
I didn't want to call attention to it.
Well,
I've been
that's
called
exactly.
names enough,
Well,
so.
and that's it, and that's how we grew up. You didn't bring more attention to yourself.
Yeah.
You didn't air your dirty laundry. That's
Right.
what I'm looking for. And what went on at home stayed at home. You don't crap where you live. That's
Right.
The way
So,
they say it.
and I didn't really understand or feel that anything had happened that was bad. I mean, I knew what happened was wrong, that
Right.
it shouldn't have happened, but I didn't have the understanding or capacity to judge what had occurred. So, we did take it to the church in our town, and
Yeah.
I know there was some follow-up with the priest and Monsignor, but, much in the way these stories have been handled that we see on the news way too frequently, these individuals were eventually moved to other parishes.
That's what they do,
and
right?
then eventually, rotated out of service.
Did this
to the
affect your
church.
relationship? Because I know this was another parish. Did it affect your relationship or your faith with God in your own parish, in your own church?
So, I had been a very interested participant in church as a young person, especially up to my confirmation in 8th grade.
Right.
We had a great uncle who was a priest in the family, growing up
Wow,
Italian in North
yeah.
Jersey. You couldn't
Sure,
really
of
snag
course.
a cat without hitting a priest in the family. And I love, Father Pete in our family.
Right.
And I found the priesthood aspirational. I never had the type of faith that I was always envious of, where people would raise their hands in church and truly feel that connection and comfort of God,
Yeah.
I always found that very aspirational. I think I've been a seeker in that aspect my whole life.
That's fair. Yeah.
But I liked the structure. I liked the rigor of routine, and even the vestments and the pomp and circumstance were appealing to me. But I
Yeah.
also am somebody who still likes, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but to play dress up in a way. Like,
Sure.
I play music. I like putting on clothes for the stage. I don't play
Right.
in jeans and a t-shirt.
Right.
When I was a little kid, I loved like dressing up as a cop. If I was in kindergarten, it's one of my
Right.
favorite pictures of me as a little kid.
Oh.
So like I can see where that was appealing, but I still was seeking, a faith journey that was satisfying. But when, after this occurred, the church became like not an interesting path for me. In college, I did I checked out a Buddhist service. We had an interdenominational type of campus ministry, and I was able to like observe other services, and I took a course in comparative religion I found very interesting. And I do have like other interests in archaeology and ancient history that tie into some religious texts, but I really lost my
You lost
faith
that,
for a
that
long
faith,
time.
sure. And, you know, a lot of survivors of sexual assaults, 'cause, I've talked to many people who've been through it. They talk about silence, where they feel unable to tell anyone. You know, it's not, you know, not that they're forced to keep silence, but they don't share because of the shame and you know, whatever, for whatever reasons.
Yeah, that's
behind
completely
it.
relatable. And I think in my case, the silence was also due to the fact that I stopped processing, and I just put a wall there, and I stepped to the other side of it, and I was a different person on the other side of it, but I had no reason was why, or that's
Right. Well, you block it. That's, you know,
I just
you
put
you
it,
compartmentalize
moved
things
on.
and
Yeah.
you move on. That's interesting. A lot of people do that when they go through trauma. They'll compartmentalize it and they'll say, okay, it's going into this box right here, and it's going to stay sealed.
Yeah.
You know?
It didn't. It you know, there was no physical injury. There was nothing I could point to. I'm okay. You know,
Yeah.
was kind of what I took from it. You know, my 15-year-old mind.
Oh my gosh.
And again, like I didn't let anybody, like I didn't let my parents were respectful of my boundaries when I
Right.
didn't want to go to the police, and I did want to address it with the priest, because this was with the you know, a member of his team that was at the retreat, and his response made him complicit in my abuse, because
Right,
he
right.
offered to participate with that other individual and myself in the threesome. And like, you know,
What is wrong?
it just was
I
so
mean,
brazen, and I
I
was just
mean-
like, this is what, okay, you know, so it's enough of this.
you know, yeah. I mean, this is our youth. This is our. They're so vulnerable, and to take advantage of it, really, it breaks my heart. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it really does.
Yeah.
And so often, this happens, and it's not talked about. And I really thank you for sharing this and being open about your struggle.
Sure.
And let's talk a little bit about, you know, how you coped. I mean, you've compartmentalized it, but it came out in other ways, right? I mean, we've talked
I see
about
that now.
alcohol.
I didn't know that at the time.
No, we've talked about like how, yeah, well, you all, you know, we all have our escape mechanisms, right?
Yeah.
When you don't realize at the time what you're doing, right? It's
No, I just kept in my process. I was practicing with my band and going to work
Right.
on the weekends. But
And-
after graduation,
right.
I lost the rigor of my schedule, and I was preparing to go to college. I was
Yes.
17 years old,
Right.
living away for the first time in a city where the drinking age was 18.
Well, that's exactly. I was just going to say the drinking age was much younger then, because
Yeah.
I know when I grew up, we used to go out to the clubs and stuff at 18. And
So I was down in Washington, D.C., and you know, a couple things happened. One, I discovered alcohol,
right.
which allowed me to kind of pick my own adventure a little bit, right? I was with new people. I could put on the mask I wanted to present myself as, and that was becoming increasingly agitated punk rock. You know, all the nice clothes that my mom sent me away with became replaced with ripped jeans and a leather jacket,
Sure.
and bleached hair, and but at the same time, I also met, you know, what have become lifelong friends. So
Oh.
I found
You found your people.
my people, like, you know, in the way that I thought I didn't in high school. You know, there's a couple of people I still do keep in touch with from high school, but really it's my college friends that saved me literally along the way in some aspects, because my drinking had accelerated quickly once I found alcohol. And it was, you know, not necessarily like a daily drinker, but when there was alcohol present, I drank all of it. And,
right.
and there were times that they had to like literally pick me up off club floors and make sure I got back to our place. And they
Wow.
did that for me. And I'm, you know, always grateful for that. But, you know, the trope was just the, you know, young kid, first time away from home.
Of course.
And, you know, I leaned into that because again, I didn't have to think about what I was doing. I just
No.
felt better. Like
Well, and that's why we do it, right? Because
Yeah.
it numbs the pain.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize that you're numbing the pain at the time
no, I had
when you're doing it.
no concept until I achieved sobriety.
And
35
yeah,
years
until
later.
afterwards, it's like, oh wow.
Yeah.
So that's what I was actually doing, and you know, can you talk about what the alcohol did for you and how you felt about it after?
Yeah, I mean, alcohol gave me the freedom like I was free of the shame of being me. You know,
Yeah.
it was no longer like nobody had to knew I was picked on. Nobody had knew that I played country songs in front of a school. Or
Yeah.
I could pick and choose, what aspects of me I let people see.
And you were uninhibited, right?
Right. So it's like, it's like swashbuckling punk rocker with a guitar and a
Exactly.
scotch bottle and a pack of cigarettes. And
Yeah.
that was the mask I chose to wear. And it felt easier,
Well, so many survivors choose substances, whether it's alcohol or marijuana or cocaine, whatever it is, not because they're weak, but because they're trying to numb that pain.
Yeah.
And basically survive it. It's their way of getting through that storm or not facing that storm that they've been through.
And the thing that also got assigned, I don't know if it was a sign of the times or what, but because I quickly picked up, I did start smoking cigarettes in high school, and then, quickly picked up alcohol
I
in
did
college.
that back then too, yeah.
And, so I was assigned this moniker of, having an addictive personality,
Mm-hmm.
which, I today reject.
Yeah.
What I now know, on the other side of these last few years is that I had untreated PTSD.
Yeah.
And that can look like an addictive personality.
Hmm.
And but
That's-
really, I don't understand what an addictive personality even means.
It's really funny that you say that, because all my life, I've been warned that I come from people with addictive personalities, and if I'm not careful, I can go down that path. And it's so funny that you say that it's from PTSD, because I bet my dad, he was an alcoholic,
Mhm.
and and that was the addictive personality. But I bet you he had PTSD.
It's not impossible. I
Yeah.
don't deny in any way that there is generational alcoholism. I've seen that in my own, my own life and other families and people
Right.
I know in the recovery community and AA. And I certainly would never negate or undermine their path. But just talking about what I've come to learn very recently about my life, as I've become more curious about my life,
Yeah, yeah.
I do believe that I don't have an addictive personality. I've got a lot of attributes to my personality that may
Right.
make it appear that way.
Right.
But I think as far as my drinking and use of substances, cigarettes, that for me was untreated PTSD. Now that doesn't mean I feel like I'll ever be cured of my alcoholism. Like I will not go back to a drink.
Right.
But I never picked up any drugs. I never smoked. I smoked pot for the first time in my mid-40s because I was in Amsterdam.
That's so
but
funny.
never as a young person.
Was there a moment or a series of moments when you were drinking that you said, something's got to change?
Yes, more frequently than I'm pleased or proud to mention. I remember like early in my first marriage, because I did get married in my early mid-20s, and I remember like, okay, it's on the weekends, this is okay, and then it was like Sunday night is still a weekend, and then Thursday nights became part of the weekend. And, as things crept and progressed, I remember having a sense of, is this okay? And that eventually evolved into, I can't drink this way forever, but I can run a 5K, I can stop for a week or two, so I'm not an addict. And
Right.
I have, a wonderful family and a job. Like I don't check any of the boxes for being an alcoholic.
Right. And you can convince yourself.
Oh, of course.
We lie to ourselves all the time.
Exactly. You create your own echo chamber and live the narrative you want to live.
Yeah.
It wasn't until 2018 that I had a medical diagnosis that finally got me to change how I was looking at life. But up until then, I can remember like embarrassing myself at family events, injuring myself in silly accidents that were, not related to alcohol, but
Of course not.
when you're drunk on top of an 8-foot snowball and you break 3 ribs and you crack your skull literally and break your shoulder, it's a little hard to sell that one downstream.
Yeah. Yes, I would say so. Oh my gosh.
But yet like there was no presence in my life, nobody who was like saying to me like, look at what's happening, like connect these dots. And I see that, talking to other alcoholics and other addicts, that until you connect those dots for yourself, there's no amount of third party connecting that's going to save you. And, you need to be 100% invested. And it wasn't until I had a couple of things happen in March of 2018. The first being I had a friend take her own life, and
Sorry.
and I was there to be a support to her husband and children at a time when everybody was surrounding them was there with drink and drug in hand, to grieve in the way that they could medicate. And I knew that wasn't respecting and honoring her memory and wishes. And then the following week, I had a medical diagnosis because I had a lot of GI issues throughout my adult life that I attributed to bad plumbing, bad genes, too much coffee, which I did quit. I quit coffee for 2.5 years before I stopped drinking alcohol, thinking,
wow,
this will do it.
Of course it will.
But a number of GI issues, none of them pleasant. And I did get an MRI of my abdomen that revealed fatty liver. And the doctor said, look at you, you don't have any other markers for why you should have a fatty liver. Tell me about your drinking. And I said, I have a drink or two a night. He's like, what's a drink or two? I said, well, I like scotch, And he said, well, you just showed me 4 drinks. And I said, well, no, that's 1 drink. And he's like, well, if it's 3 fingers and those fat fingers of yours, it's 4, 5.5 ounces of scotch. He's like, that's medically speaking. And that's where I learned like this radical self-honesty, okay, so if I'm going to tell a doctor that I have a single drink or 2 drinks, lying to the doctor doesn't save me anything.
No.
So really it was that MRI of the liver that I received that result on.
And what made you do the MRI of the liver? I'm just curious.
I've been experiencing symptoms for 6 or more months that they couldn't really find a root cause for. And I don't think that fatty liver was actually the root cause. And the actual diagnosis at the end of that was probably anxiety.
Wow.
Because I didn't like the way I was living, if I'm frank.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the courage to call it what it was. And I was afraid like a lot of the wheels would come off of my life.
So you were older at this point.
I was 50 years old. It
Wow.
was 2018, and March 13th is my sober date. That was the day I received this diagnosis and had the conversation with the doctor.
Wow.
And I haven't picked up a drink since.
God bless you, Eric. That's amazing.
I had to decide in that moment, did I want to live or not? Because anything beyond putting down alcohol was a slow motion suicide. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
And I did want to live, and I've got a wonderful family, and 3 beautiful children. I didn't want to go anywhere, but I couldn't keep living the way I was, and that became very clear to me on that day.
That's what I was going to ask you. In looking back and how you've faced what was going on in your life, you actually faced it head on instead of running from it. Instead of saying, it's the liver, but maybe I'll just have one more drink or.
Yeah. And believe me, all those thoughts went through my head that day. And, I had 3+ decades of, drinking unhealthfully.
Yeah.
And I knew it was time for change, but I didn't know, I had no curiosity about me. And I didn't even have the capacity for curiosity about me in the way that I have in these last few years of my life. So I kind of look at my alcoholic progression or my sobriety progression, like started in 2018. And for the first 8 months, I just gutted it out by myself.
Okay.
I got sober at home. I stayed at home. I didn't talk to anybody.
So you didn't join AA or you didn't do any of that?
No.
I was going to ask you, did you go to therapy?
No. So that was March. and July. I remember getting in bed and saying to my former spouse, my first wife, I've been sober for months now, and I feel worse than ever, and I'm more depressed than ever. And she said, well, you should do something about that. So I did find a therapist who I still see today and adore. Like, she's been tremendously helpful. She's an addiction specialist. She did help me pursue psychiatric medication that fall, which helped a lot. And I felt really emboldened and like I was living without depression for the first time ever. The Thanksgiving of that year, so 8 months, no AA, but seeing a therapist, my brother-in-law passed away very suddenly at 60 years old. And he was the bigger brother, the older brother I never had. He was my then wife's sister. And she went to be with her sister. My kids were at school, and I remember going to the kitchen and opening the liquor cabinet above the fridge and being like, who would begrudge me this? And in that moment, I looked at that 8 months of effort, and it was really hard. And I called a neighbor and friend who I knew had been to rehab, and I told her what was happening, and she and her husband took me that day to an AA speaker meeting.
Wow.
And it was, in the next town down, and that kind of thing. And was like, wow, these people look just like me, and all of a sudden, like in that space and moment, I felt such relief. I didn't feel as lonely and didn't feel as ashamed, because like here are all these mothers and fathers, sisters, brothers,
Right.
aunts, uncles.
You're not alone.
Exactly. And that, maybe I don't need to feel as much shame as I do, but, unfortunately there's a lot of stigma around these things. And
I know.
after that first meeting, I called a client of mine in sales, and one of my longest relationships at my job. But again, it was a business relationship, and this was a client. So
Right.
I asked him to lunch, which is not weird. We had lunch usually once a month. And when we sat down, I told him why I asked him to lunch, because I suspected he may have been in the program. And he immediately stopped me and told me his story, and then invited me to a meeting that night. And he's my sponsor today. And
that's incredible.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who have gone through the program, and what they tell me is, it's just, you just say not today, tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you get into those moments where you're feeling like the need, it's like, let me not have it today. And
Yeah.
I had a fairly big addiction to cigarettes, and for years I remember when I had first met my husband, and I'm like, if you want a girl that doesn't smoke,
I'm not your girl.
Yeah, exactly. Go find another one.
Yeah, no, I can relate, because that was a very difficult one to, like, that's when I did relapse time and time again, getting past. But alcohol, thank God, I had that couple down the street that took me to a meeting, and then my sponsor today that really, put me on a path to not needing to pick up again, because I now feel like I never want to go back in that way, because I've learned so much. But my early sobriety, it was a confusing time. My children were going off to college. COVID came along. I can now see that there were cracks beginning to form in my marriage. We had some other difficulties, but one of the things my therapist helped me with, because at the time we separated at the very beginning of 2022, I became very angry at AA and my sobriety, and actually almost made a conscious decision to relapse at that point, because I had quit drinking to improve my life and marriage, not to ruin it. And
Right.
I think I conflated or blamed AA, or blamed my sobriety for
the loss
my
of your
marriage falling apart.
Yeah.
But my therapist was very helpful in helping me understand that more often than you'd care to believe, that this is what happens. When
Yeah.
when one party makes such a radical life change, it impacts the whole of the relationship.
Of course.
We had other stressors that we couldn't overcome, and we did separate and divorce. But from all bad things come blessings too. And
Right.
Early on in my new single life, I did meet who I'm now married to.
Oh, God bless.
And entering a new relationship with somebody opens up all these questions about you. Like, so for example, on my dating profile, I had a picture of me with my marathon number from the New York City Marathon in 2021. And she's like, hey, what else are you addicted to? And I was like, wait, what? And I was like, well, I don't drink. So alcohol, and as we began dating, she began to become more curious, and she poked more holes in my thinking, because I'd always kind of leaned into, generational alcoholism. And
Yeah.
she's like, okay, you've taken me home to meet your family and nobody drinks. So what are you talking about?
Well, that's true. Good points.
And, the more that she got to know me, and now we're talking, mid 2022. And I also had decided to stop taking my psychiatric meds at that time, because I wanted to kind of see what I was feeling in a very naked way.
Right.
And, what happened was a lot of crying daily. And, Mary never quit or gave up on me. And, as she poked and was more curious, I began to talk about, some of the things that occurred in my life. And, one of the things I told her was about my abuse by clergy at 15. And she said, nobody in your family drinks, but, who does drink is child sex abuse survivors.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, but, huh?
Yeah. Well, that's true.
And, I just never, ever connected that event to injury that caused me to self-medicate in this way.
Interesting.
And I had a lot of interest in some of the new psychedelic therapies that were coming online over the last 10 years.
Yeah, sure.
And I was interested in this ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, but I was also petrified because, as I mentioned, I did try weed for the first time in my 40s in Amsterdam, but I
Right.
no other drug experience. I
Right,
never was a
right.
recreational drug user. No judgment, just not my
No,
not my
right,
bag.
not your thing, right.
But ketamine-assisted psychotherapy revealed a few things. I mean, in the first session, out came a lot about what happened with clergy in my teen years.
Wow.
And I did it in the presence of a psychotherapist, and I did 10 sessions across 20 weeks, again, and fully in the presence of a psychotherapist who guided the sessions and supported me through the sessions and transcribed a lot of what I had to say. And that's when I first began to truly understand that something more happened to me at 15. But here I was now, my mid 50s.
Right, right. And you're finally revisiting
Like the
that.
light just began to come on. But it wasn't until the next year where after I completed the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, I did do a couple of sound healing ceremonies where they would be these protracted, hours-long sound healings in a meditation, environment, facilitated with musicians and leaders, and there was maybe 15 participants. And the first of those, and I didn't really mention that, like my first 4 years in AA, I attended meetings regularly. I led a meeting for 2 years in North Jersey.
Wow.
But I never did the step work because that step 3 about God was just more than I wanted to deal with. And,
Yeah.
I had,
And you didn't actually go back and think about why that was, or did you?
I had conflated it with hardships I had in a church we did join in my
Right,
adult
and we
married
all
life.
like go in and out of religion too. I mean, I
was-
had my love hates with
I
with God,
tried
yeah.
with the Protestant church in my first marriage to acclimate back into church, and what I realized at the end, and we did leave the church prior to separating. We'd left the church probably a couple of years before our marriage ended, but I left the church because I wasn't making a spiritual connection. I wasn't being fulfilled, and I didn't feel that the values of those values were my values.
Right, right.
I felt like I was not
So
living
now
an
you're
authentic
doing
life.
the sound healing, which kind of that you can feel because you're a music guy. So
I'm so connected on so many levels, and I
Right.
was learning to I never could pray, but in meditation I felt like a direct connection to the universe and this energy, and I was receiving downloads. And
how cool
so
is
the
that?
first sound healing said you need to finish your step work and make a proper amends to your children at a minimum. And so I did, moved past, I then began to identify the universe, in a very immature way that's developed over the course of the last few years, but as my higher power,
Right, right.
tapping into that universal.
Your spirituality as opposed to
believe
religion per se.
I believe there's the divine is in each one of us. We are divine.
Yes.
And so connecting to that kind of Akashic kind of collective divinity, I was able to complete my step work, again, working with the same gentleman who brought me to that first meeting, or second meeting, I should say. And the second sound healing I did, I had a very clear message to reclaim the narrative and own the end of my story. That what happened to you at 15 doesn't have to be how your story with the church ends.
That's right.
So really it was these last few years where I came to understand that it wasn't just something that happened and I buried. It was something that happened and I had an injury that I had no awareness of.
Wow.
So really it was through Mary's curiosity about my life, kind of dating, that brought these things all out to the forefront.
You never know how these things come out and come back at you and resurface, but somehow they do.
Yeah.
And when they do, you have choices of how you handle it, and you can run from it, you can face it, and your bravery shines so brightly, Erik. I mean, it just amazes me. But I think it also brought out your first passion, your first love, which has been your music, right?
So yeah, it's been interesting. So as I began to understand the injury that was inflicted upon me at 15, I began to reconnect to some of my younger self. Like I did pick up my guitar in the months leading up to the end of the marriage, and when I lived alone, I kept it right next to my desk, and it was kind of my fidget. And I started writing some very graphic in terms of like this is my story. Like, so whether there were songs about my children or my alcoholism, I just began writing my story in ways that made sense to me. So
Wow.
some of my song structures are not typical, and some of the ways I pursue songwriting are not typical, but it's how I want to express myself and how I want to express my story. And, ultimately, as time went by and the end of 2023, when I came to understand that this was the injury that predicated a lot of what my life experience became, I began to work on a song about my experience. And it took 9 months, 10 months to write the lyrics. I chose every word very carefully.
Was it scary to release it into the world?
Yeah, so I did ultimately record it last summer in the recording studio, and I hired some musicians to accompany me. And yeah, it took a few months, even once the final mix was done, for me to actually post it up on Spotify and other platforms. I felt like I needed to kind of steel myself, because even though it's veiled within my own poetry, it's pretty graphic. And
can you give us a couple lines, maybe, which we'll talk about? Would you hope people feel or understand when they hear this song?
Yeah, for sure, I'd be happy to. So like it opens with almost kind of this disassociated, I am something to be healed. I am waiting to breathe free. I came to understand, like you talked about compartmentalization and putting things in a box, like that I had ignored an injury or was not even aware of it, put it someplace very hidden away. But like in September of 2024, like I knew that I am something to be healed, and I am disassociated from that injury, and I need to reincorporate it into my life. And then I said, the good Lord watching up above, seeing all you took off me. Like I'm not denying God, although I don't have that same relationship I'd always hoped for in that way. But I wanted my abusers to know that like the same Lord you serve watched what you did. And like that's not free.
And that's right.
Then the vestments crumbled in the dark, blood and bread are on the floor. Come with me, my little angel. Faith breaks trust behind the door. That's very much about being invited into the council room, which was really at the retreat center. It looked like a janitor's closet.
Right, and they hide it behind the fact that you're being allowed into the sacred space, and how manipulative is that?
And that's where vestments crumbled in the dark. Like, they're treating their own most holy elements,
right,
like trash, right?
Yeah,
and the way they treated me. Your hands folded in holy abandon, in your grasp the body and blood, picking out the path to power in the remnants of the flood. Make no room for the strong and the willful, they'll find no comfort in your keep. Pray your love on the weakest among us. All that you gave me deprives me of sleep. So this was, confronting the priest and expecting, some vindication or justice to follow.
Right. But
and really, they just sat there in their holy, kind of.
And if there were other survivors listening right now who may not have their words yet, what would you say to them? Like as you
I mean, not have their words yet. It's to not give up on yourself. Like you're worthy of love and you're worthy of a voice, and
they're not alone, right?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I've tried to become so vocal about this is because people, but men especially, don't talk about being abused. And the first time I performed this song, a gentleman in his 70s came up to me and put his arm on my shoulder and said, "Hey man, me too." And at first I didn't even know what he was talking about.
Wow.
And it was at an open mic night, and I said, I'm sorry. And he's like, "I was abused by clergy." And it was almost like this solidarity, but he had nothing more to say.
Yeah, no, and there's no words. There really are no words.
But that said it all.
Exactly. You have that you've been through the same thing, and you're part of a club that you really never wanted to be part of.
Yeah.
You know, and
The first time I did an AA outspeak, like as a speaker at a speaker meeting, I told this story, and by the time we went around back to the leader, he had very watery eyes, and he looked at me and he said, he's like, my court date is in 2.5 weeks. He was almost 80, and he was finally getting his day in court, and the New York Archdiocese just released that there. So
wow,
it was very, it's just very impactful.
it comes full circle.
But these are people who don't. It's hard to find your voice when nobody says it first.
Well,
it
and
doesn't
that's
feel
true.
safe to say.
Well, that's right, especially, and they prey on people that have always been victimized in different ways. Has your relationship with faith or spirituality changed since you've come to recognize what it's all about?
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because I spent so long seeking, and I think I'll always be a seeker. It's part of my nature, but I am finally free of the fear of God.
That's amazing.
I never believed that in this interventionist God who would pray for something, this or that, or who's puppet mastering my life in that way. And I do not believe in hell. So I'm free of this. And
how nice is that?
It is, but I believe the spiritual terms that I've adopted have been revealed to me, through the therapies I pursued, and by the universe. I mean, I've also more recently participated in some indigenous, tribal, spiritual pursuits.
That's so awesome.
And I've been shown things. I literally in one meditation weekend was shown the memory of my own birth.
Wow.
And that helped me shed the feeling that I carried my whole life, that there was something fundamentally wrong with me, that something must be wrong with me to feel this way.
Right.
And have been treated this way, to be picked on and then have that bullying validated by the church.
Right.
What's more condemning than that? And
yeah.
what I realized today is that we're all worthy of love.
Yes,
and,
we are.
My reclaiming of my power is a work in progress, but I now feel a connection to the universe. I feel a connection to all people, and beyond people, animals, plants. I've developed more of a love of nature through this process.
Exactly.
But I've got much more compassion, much more patience, much more interest and curiosity about my fellow human. And
how do you protect your boundaries now from?
Yes, but I'm becoming less and less guarded in some aspects, because I don't think that everyone's out to harm me.
Good. That's good.
But yeah, I mean, I protect my boundaries in terms of what's an appropriate level of service when helping another person. But I just kind of follow my instincts there, and I think they're pretty good. And I think we as humans have pretty good instincts for caring for one another.
If you could go back and talk to your younger self, what would you say?
So I'm actually doing this kind of work right now, and I have successfully connected to and communicated with my 7 and 8 year old self. And there was it was a very emotional kind of session. It was just in the past 8 weeks. But I was able to bridge that divide and assure that younger version of myself that I didn't quit on him, and that there's self-love and acceptance to follow. And I'm still working to connect as successfully with my 15-year-old self. I think there's still some anger there. But again, I'm not quitting on him, and I'll continue to do the work.
You do. You that's part of the secret, is that you keep on working, and the fact that you have all the support is just so wonderful. And for someone listening now who's carrying a similar secret, especially a male survivor or those abused with religious institutions, what do you want them to know? Well,
I mean, for somebody still kind of suffering with their own silence, I mean, we're not weak and we're not broken just because we were treated poorly by somebody we depended upon, or somebody we didn't depend upon. Being abused is not a choice that we made, and it's not your fault. So, it's kind of like coming to sobriety. You're going to find your voice when it's your time, but and it does happen in the time that it happens in. It's not something that happens by a certain time or a certain age. I mean, I'm
exactly.
58 years old, and I'm so happy.
It's never too late to heal, right?
No. I mean, and like, I've got such an enthusiasm for the years to come that I never had, because I lost the hopelessness that I gained at 15.
Wow. Erik, your story is a reminder that survival doesn't always look brave at first. But it looks like getting through each day, one day at a time.
Yep.
And healing doesn't mean forgetting, but about finding your voice and your body and your truth.
Yep.
And I thank you so much for choosing honesty and for your music that will help others feel less alone. I'd just like to do like a little gentle grounding session with you and just ask you, maybe give me one word that describes where you are right now.
So one word's tough. I think authentic is kind of like I'm trying to live very authentically and, lead by example in that way. I feel whole, but most importantly, I feel loved, and I mean by myself as well. And that's something I've never been able to say.
Is there a song that makes you feel safe?
So honestly, my songs make me feel safe. I think for a long time, I did lean too heavily into other people's music to support me, and that almost it supported my own fetishistic relationship with my own depression in that way. But now my songs do make me feel safe because they're
who
truth.
You are. It's your truth. That's awesome.
Yep.
What gives you hope today?
That I found self-love and acceptance even in my late 50s. And, I sometimes count summers, and get a little like, wish I'd done this earlier. But you know what? It's never too late to find some joy. And that self-love and acceptance has been the thing that gives me the most hope and the power to live authentically.
I love that. I close every episode with a poem from my late son, Scott, and I try and tie him in a little bit, but this one, it just reminded me of his first crush on a girl, and it kind of brought me to what started this whole journey for you. So it goes like this. My brain feels condensed. My feelings are compressed. My body is dense. The energy that once surged through me, refined me, made me, left. Even though I know what I did was right, why does it feel so wrong? I feel like a fucking fraud. She made me feel safe and warm. I never wanted anyone more. When I had her in my arms, I felt the highest I've ever been, the proudest I've ever been. It felt as if I was flying, never crying. She took away my deepest demons, replaced them with her love and affection. But she'd just be giving others the same attention. Now, I ain't saying that's wrong. She's so great. I couldn't even imagine keeping her all to myself. But she told me she wanted me, just me. And she had me. I thought I had her. But obviously, we didn't have the same vision I see. She whipped my heart with a belt. She couldn't control how she felt, just like how ice cream melts. She taught me so much about myself. I couldn't be more glad she felt how she felt. I will never be more happy I met her and won't ever forget her. So that's
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
15, and
it's amazing.
I just like to add that if this conversation brings up anything for our audience, please know that help is available and you are not alone. There's the RAIN hotline, 800-656-HOPE. And Erik, I got to ask you, would you be willing to share your song with us today?
Yep, absolutely. I'd be happy to have the audience hear it, and happy to hear from them on my socials.
Awesome. And can you give us your social?
So I use Instagram most frequently. So my handle is @Moses, MOSES _14500.
Well, there we go. Thank you so much for tuning in to SOS Stories of Survivors today. And every week, I hope to see you. And thank you so much for joining us. God bless you.
Thank you, Serina.
Thank you.
I am something to be healed. I am waiting to breathe free. Good Lord, watching up above, seeing all you took off me. Vestments crumbled in the dark, blood and bread are on the floor. Come with me, my little angel. Faith breaks trust behind the door. Your hands folded in holy abandon, in your grasp the body and blood, picking out the path to power in the remnants of the flood. Make no room for the strong and the willful, they'll find no comfort in your keep. Pray your love on the weakest among us, all that you gave deprives me of sleep. Built a happy marriage. In my wake, a Maleficent home. We an army led in silence, inner child slain and alone. Your filthy fingers have tarnished the silver, the holy water is sticky with cum. Altar boys aligned to your bidding, unaware of all that you've done. With a drop of nectar, I'm beaten daily by the dew, moving deftly through the motions, never getting away from you. With my lips you press the future, in your hand hold heaven today. With your blessing squandered my salvation, and I drank my decades away.